We've talked offense so far in our recaps and thoughts about spring practice as we get ready for TCU football in 2024. Well, we got a new defensive coordinator in Andy Avalos. We're hoping it's a much more aggressive defense. What will this defense look like this upcoming season? And how big was it the Frogs got Jonathan Bax back in a uniform after he hit the transfer portal? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. We're free and available wherever it is you get your podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts in its audio form. It is Wednesday, March 27th. We're getting ready for TCU football. Spring practice is underway. We're going to talk some basketball in a second. We do have our first TCU basketball player that has hit the transfer portal. We'll get to your reaction in segment 3. But first, we continue with our theme of the offseason for TCU football. Spring practice happening. Team hit the field again this morning for the third time as a group. They practiced on Saturday, Monday, and now on Wednesday as they prepare for the spring game here in a few weeks. I want to talk about the defense today, though. Jonathan Bax spoke with the media recently. Steven Johnson had some good notes in an article in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And if you missed it this offseason, or just to refresh everybody's memory, Jonathan Bax hit the transfer portal pretty quickly after the season was over. And it was a big deal. He was one of those guys. He was a 3-star recruit, I believe, come out of high school, but had a really impressive offer list. LSU, late in the process, was pushing hard after him, but TCU held on to him. That was a big deal. And he showed out in the offseason. Like, that was a name that Joe Gillespie mentioned multiple times. That was impressive to him. He was making plays. He was making things happen. Now, when he played in high school, he was more of an edge defender. Right, your prototypical kind of stand-up 3-4 or 5-2 type of defensive end, outside linebacker that was rushing the passer and also could make plays at the line of scrimmage and at the second level in coverage and all those different things. This past season, he didn't play a whole lot. He wasn't really featured much as a freshman, except on special teams. And it was surprising because, we can always kind of crown somebody or award somebody as an off-season hero or champ, or hear about all the things they're going to do within the actual game start, and the rotation thins out and kind of shortens, and then maybe those players don't get as much playing time as you'd expect. But it was odd that we just consistently heard about Jonathan Bax during the offseason as someone who was going to make plays. And so it was weird that it never came to fruition, but he ends up hitting the portal after the season, and Joe Gillespie gets let go. Andy Avalos comes in, and one of his first priorities is getting Jonathan Bax on the phone and saying, hey, let's figure this out. So he ends up coming back to campus and is now working at that stud linebacker position that we've talked about over the past few months, outside linebacker, pass rusher, but also has the ability to drop into coverage, give different looks, and so on. So he's in his more natural spot, and that's something he talked to when he had his press conference earlier this week. He said, listen, it was a really tough transition for me last season, moving to inside linebacker. There were some things, he said there were some things that he didn't see eye to eye on with Joe Gillespie. Didn't really get into specifics, but based on what he said, I'm guessing that was just his role on the team and where he was playing. And he talked about the struggle of whether or not to go in the portal and that decision-making process and how he felt some loyalty to the coaching staff. I do think it's a good example. It's fans. Sometimes we can just lash out and be like, well, this person's not loyal. They don't understand what it takes. Like, they're not willing to sit behind and earn their dues and all these things. But I do feel like it's important for us to realize there's a lot of pressure on these kids. They want to be good. They want to do well for these schools. They want to give themselves the best chance to play beyond the college ranks, to have opportunities outside of college football. And so to do that, you want to be used in your best ability. And he was a outside linebacker type of player, edge type of player in high school. They moved him inside. It just felt like that wasn't a great fit for him. And so at the time, he kind of assessed it and said, well, if this is going to be my role here, which it's also interesting to me and it kind of it makes me want to understand like what the recruiting process was like for him and what they were telling him, like what the defensive staff was talking about as far as how they were going to use him, that it happened this way. But I mean, that's all kind of water under the bridge now. But my point is, like, I think as fans, we see somebody hitting the transfer portal as like an inherently selfish thing, but this is a two-way street in some ways. And sometimes coaches ask guys to leave. Sometimes guys just don't feel like they're being used in the best way possible. And yes, I think we could all use more patience and an ability to like assess things and have a good view of the bigger picture. But I think that's tough to do when we're talking about young people, right? It's tough for me to do at age 31. So anyway, Jonathan Bax, bottom line is he's back. And he said that one thing that helped him through this process was a lot of the coaching staff stayed on board even with Joe Gillespie's departure, right? So, you know, his position coach, not really his position coach, but Jamarcus McFarland, defensive line coach, was back. Paul Gonzalez is back. Carlton Buckles was back. And those guys spoke highly of him to Coach Avalos when he got there. They were like, hey, this is the guy we really liked. He worked hard in practice. We think he's going to be a good player. We need to make it a priority to get him back. And that is one underrated thing about Sonny keeping the position coaches together. It was kind of odd to me at the time because it's like, okay, you're bringing in a whole new system, but you're not going to let the new person handpick their assistant coaches. But I definitely understand, especially in this era now of the transfer portal, that this is a big benefit if you change the play caller, but you don't really change, you know, the guts of the operation, the guys that have been there and that are going to be there day in and day out. Then it allows you to maintain a relationship with a lot of these players. And I think we'll probably see some departures after the spring practice because some guys on the defense now will just simply, I mean, similar to what Jonathan did at the beginning of the offseason, they'll kind of look at the writing on the wall and say, I don't know if this system's the best for me. I don't know if this situation is the best for me. I need to move on and give myself a chance to play somewhere else. Bottom line, though, you have Jonathan Bax in his more traditional spot, and he's excited, and I think he's ready to make plays. And it gives you someone on the roster that fits this defense well. And at least at the kind of outside linebacker position, there weren't a lot of players that fit that bill. They also went and got some guys in the transfer portal that can do that and should do that for them well. So I'm hoping for Jonathan Bax that this is going to be a breakout season. And I'm excited for his development and opportunities in the defense where they can be more aggressive and make things happen. And hopefully he can make some splash plays and get to the quarterback and cause chaos this upcoming season. Another thing that I really want to watch as the offseason unfolds is what is the secondary going to look like? Because TCU's been really fortunate. And they've had some stability at corner. Last year they brought in Avery Helm, who was on the other side of Josh Newton. Newton leaves now. Avery's going to slide into that kind of cornerback one role. And they brought in a lot of transfer players. You also have some holdovers on the roster. Vernon Glover's a young guy I know they really like. And I think he'll make some strides this year and be a factor on the field. Channing Canada, the JUCO transfer, played a number of snaps last season, and he'll be ready to roll. But that corner spot, they addressed it. That seemed to be a place where just coming in, Andy Avalos said, we have to get deeper here. We have to get better. So they brought in Travis Broughton, the corner from Utah, who's a 4-year starter for the Utes. Also, Dre Selden from New Mexico State, Javon McIver from Austin Peay. These are all corners, the guys I'm listing now. Lamarian James is a name that's made a lot of appearance on practice reports so far from ODU. He's also been really active in those one-on-one drills against some of the best receivers on TCU's team. And then at the safety position, J.C. Oliver from Tulsa. They went and got Ken Wilson, brought over a Nevada transfer at the safety position, Richard Toney, and then Cam Smith, the safety from Memphis. So safety was a rough spot last year, and I really thought it was going to be one of the strengths of the team because there was so much experience. But guys struggled in coverage. They struggled, in run support, making plays. They're revamping that. I think the corner spot is going to be pretty deep. I like the idea of, Helm, whether it's Canada or Glover, and then you've got one of those guys plus a number of experienced transfer players. And Travis Broughton might end up being the dude too, because he does come in with so much experience at the Power 5 level. But one thing that's going to be a key here, this is an aggressive defense, or at least more aggressive than what we saw under Joe Gillespie, which means you're also taking more risk and you're putting yourselves, in isolation in the secondary. You're putting guys on an island, which requires them to make plays. So you need players who understand what they're doing, who understand their assignments, and they're confident. I know that's one reason why they went after guys that have had some playing experience. But there will be some hiccups here early in the season. I mean, I fully expect some missed assignments, some blown coverages, just as this team tries to get the new defense under wraps and understand what they're doing and what's going to be expected of them. But I like the direction that we're moving on the defensive side of the ball. And as some people have said, I mean, just to be frank and honest about it, there were some good moments last season, but by and large, it can't really be much worse. I mean, it can't be much worse than it was in that Oklahoma game, right? It can't be much worse than it was in that Colorado game. It was just such a rough season at times for the defense, both giving up big plays and also just kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts of teams running the ball at will against TCU and just sort of doing what they wanted. When we come back, a TCU basketball player has hit the portal. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I do want to mention a couple of our great sponsors, though. Bettor Together. Again, if you have a busted bracket and you're like, man, I'm already totally out of this in a bracket challenge, why don't you try Bettor Together? It's the new daily fantasy platform, but it's the first cooperative daily fantasy platform. You can team up with people that you know. You can team up with friends, and it gives you a better chance of winning than going at it alone. It creates a shared experience. You can split a contest entry that gives you the feeling of being connected even when you're apart. It's a way to stay connected with friends. You can put yourself in a group chat with some friends and get it done. Join Bettor Together today. It offers us a familiar experience for existing daily fantasy players with a social twist. You simply pick more or less on some real-time player stats and grabs. Strategize with your partner to boost your odds and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy sports movement. Again, that's Bettor Together. Download the app today and get a friend involved. Play with them. Bettor Together, a proud sponsor here of the Locked On Network. If you're looking for something to watch those Sweet 16 games on this weekend, you need an upgrade in the TV department. Why not try out an Amazon Fire TV? Fire TV is your destination for sports, live games, highlights, in-depth analysis. It's got an amazing viewing experience. And they also have the Fire TV stick. So if you already have a television, you're like, I don't really want to change TVs. Get a Fire TV stick, plug it in the back of your television, and you get access to all that Fire TV has to offer. Live sports, all the different games, everything you need. And Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels that deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports and brands, all for free. That includes the Locked On Network. So the Locked On Network is on Fire TV. We have our own Fire TV channel where shows are getting pumped out, content's getting pumped out every day. Movies, music, everything you need, as well as live sports. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Learn more at www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. Again, that's www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. Check that out today. So news came down yesterday. I saw Jamie Plunkett had this, as well as Steven Johnson from the 4-Star Telegram. Micah Peavy plans to enter the transfer portal. There was some confusion. At one point, it was like, well, his name's not in there yet. Maybe this isn't a done deal. But when the dust kind of settled, the report was, name's not in the portal yet. It can take 24 to 48 hours for the paperwork to process, for everything compliance-wise to go through. But Micah Peavy is planning on entering the transfer portal. He is also putting his name in the NBA draft to see, what his grade's going to be, where he could go. Now, here's the thing about Micah. I mean, he's a great athlete. I think his shooting has improved a lot. His stat line this year, he averaged 10 points a game, almost 5 rebounds, 2 assists per game. He shot 45% from the field. And from three-point range, he shot 31% this year, which isn't lighting the world on fire, but it's a significant increase. His three-point percentage, his first season at TCU was 16%, and went up to 26, now 31. He went from averaging 6 points a game to almost 11 points a game in his last season at TCU. And he really became somebody who could create his own offense, which isn't something that he was really known for early in his career. He took over that Kansas State game on the road in the second half of that ball game when TCU was struggling. And he's a great defender, really good on the ball defender. So I think there could be a potential for him in the league as like a defensive guy who could also be a spot-up shooter. But that shooting has to continue to improve. If I had to guess right now, I think Micah's probably not a draftee, but maybe somebody who would get signed and could go the G League route and see if he could work his way to the NBA from there. I don't know what his interest level would be in that or where he's at with that decision. But if he doesn't go to the NBA, it sounds like he's interested in at least exploring what his other options are going to be and keeping that door to, college eligibility open moving forward. This is a loss, right? Like, you're losing one of your best individual defenders. This was a team that struggled on defense in general. Again, he was a guy that put a lot of work in to improve his offensive game. And so it's unfortunate that he's moving on. I do wonder, when I was doing this podcast back in 2021, nobody was really listening to it. It was in the early days. I honestly didn't have much of an idea of what I was doing. But for the few of you that were, thank you. And if you stuck with me this long, I really appreciate it. Anyway, that was the season TCU basketball really struggled. It was the second year in a row they missed all of postseason, right? Like, they missed the NCAA tournament, missed the NIT. The year before, everything got canceled. But if it would have continued, TCU would have missed both the NIT and the NCAA tournament. And that offseason, there was a mass exodus. And at that time, I was banging the drum saying, like, hey, there needs to be a change here. Like, the Jamie era has run its course. Need to move on, find another coach. And weirdly enough, now maybe it was just because the show wasn't as popular, and so nobody really interacted with me much at all at that time when I was doing it. But I feel like there wasn't a huge groundswell of people calling for a change, with the basketball program at that time. I think there's a much bigger and louder voices now that are asking for that. I'm not in that camp, but there's more people that believe that now, coming off 3 straight NCAA tournament appearances, which is sort of fascinating. But I get the frustration of, like, can't get to the second weekend, all that. In 2021, though, things were pretty stale, and that was the year that RJ Nembhard played alongside Mike Miles, and it never really meshed, and they ended up losing a lot of games. So he leaves for the NBA, or attempts to go to the NBA, and then they just had like a mass exodus of transfers. Kevin Samuel left, went to Florida Gulf Coast. PJ Fuller entered the transfer portal. Basically, all the guys that had contributed. Jaden Ledee, that was the year that Jaden Ledee left and ended up at San Diego State. And I'll say this, I was a Jaden Ledee truther. Like, I remember watching him and thinking that guy could play. It just felt like when he was on the floor, good things happened. I remember him having a really good game against Oklahoma State that year when they beat Cade Cunningham. TCU Horned Frogs, 2-0 against Cade Cunningham, which is a very funny fact to share with your friends. But I couldn't have expected Jaden Ledee, like, player of the year type of guy, right? Like, that was way off my radar, even though I was a fan of his game and thought he could do some good things. But they had this mass exodus of players, and that was the offseason they brought in Damian Baugh, Micah Peavy, Emmanuel Miller, Xavier Cork, and they sort of revamped the whole roster. And at the time, I don't remember there being a ton of excitement around it because the general thought was like, well, we lost basically all our contributors from last year, aside from Mike Miles. Now we're kind of building a new team around him. It feels like it's going to take time for this group to gel. But to their credit, they did, and that's kind of how we got to this renaissance now of where they're at. I'm wondering if we see a similar situation this offseason. Emmanuel Miller is going to move on, right? Chuck O'Bannon moving on. Those guys are leaving just because it's time for them to pursue professional basketball. Micah Peavy's in the portal. We'll see what Jacoby Coles decides to do. Avery Anderson's going to be moving on. I assume Jameer Nelson Jr. probably will as well. If you could keep Jameer Nelson Jr., that'd be fantastic. Ernest Uday is going to stay. And then everyone else, I think, is kind of a coin flip what the decision is going to be. But you're going to have a very different roster in 2024, 2025. Now, you got some young guys in Jace Posey and Isaiah Manning that didn't play this year that I hope will be kind of foundational pieces of this next core. I assume, I imagine they're going to hit the transfer portal pretty hard. You got 3 freshmen coming in that are highly rated. So you're mixing and matching here. And one thing that I'm excited to see is, okay, does that usher in any changes from a philosophy standpoint, right? Do you see a team that has better half-court sets, that is more disciplined, that buys in more on the defensive side of the ball, just because a lot of them are new, and hopefully Jamie can get them motivated and get them in a place where they're functioning at a high level. We'll see. But good luck to Micah. I think he's honestly a good testimony for what a good program TCU can be, and that he got here. He had a very limited offensive game that improved. He stayed really good on the defensive side of the ball, and now he's at least given himself a chance to go the professional basketball route or possibly end up somewhere else if it doesn't work out this offseason. When we come back, I'll get some of your reactions from yesterday's show. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Our March Madness moment brought to you by Nissan. You can shop now at nissanusa.com. Check out their new line of SUVs, 2024 SUVs. The North Carolina Tar Heels can only be described as an Armada. The 1 seed is as hardcore as it gets out there. No wonder they've made it to the Sweet 16. They'll face off with Alabama on Thursday in the NCAA tournament. They are a favorite that's picked by so many to make a run for a championship. The Armada, the Pathfinder, and the Nissan Rogue. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada on your next big adventure. Find your next big adventure at nissanusa.com. Again, that's nissanusa.com. Shop there today. Speaking of cars, you got to keep your car safe. You have to make sure that it's running to the high level, that it has quality performance. You can help do that by using eBay Motors. eBay Motors has millions of parts that you can choose from. You can keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. They have everything you need to maintain your vehicle or level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts for your ride. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. ebaymotors.com, guaranteed fit program only available for U.S. customers. Millions of parts for your MVP. Win every time with parts that fit your ride. On yesterday's show, we talked about spring practice, where the team was. Ken Seal spoke with the media, quarterback for TCU. Who's getting a lot of reps right now with Josh Hoover out. Some of you chimed in and had some thoughts. We also talked about the wide receiver room and where they are. Tommy Fisher said Savion is going to be that dude this year. I think people are going to like what they see out of Jack Besh this year. I think there's 3 guys that are capable of being a true number 1, Savion, Wright, and Eric McAllister. This is probably the best wide receiver room we've had on paper. I think it looks like a really good wide receiver room on paper. McAllister, hopefully he's a guy that can stretch the field. I like the potential of Savion, as you do as well. And then, Jack Besh is an interesting player. He dealt with injuries last season. He was a freshman All-American at LSU in kind of that tight end H-back spot. They had him in the slot last year, and he made some plays at times. But if he's healthy, I think he's definitely someone that can make an impact and be used over the middle of the field, like we hope to see from Drake Dabney, the tight end from Baylor as well. Good to hear from Tyler Jones again. He says TCU has good possession receivers, probably 8 receivers that get 200 to 600 yards. However, of the returning receivers, only Savion and JP have ever recorded 500 yards in a season. McAllister is one receiver that could possibly step up to number one. He could draw some dudes and maybe make other receivers play better. They have a lot riding on his success. Yeah, I think that's a good point about somebody drawing more attention, because that was what Quentin Johnston did so well. The gravity of the defense drew to him, and so it allowed other people to make plays. The only thing I'll push back on a little bit is I think Savion showed some great ability at the end of the season to also be a go-to type of guy. But from a proven commodity standpoint or proven production standpoint, not a lot of guys coming back that have put up, even close to 1,000-yard seasons. Zoom Play says, to be honest, I think we have the best wide receiver room in the country. I love the confidence, man. Always love to hear from you. Good stuff. Cedric Robinson said, we need a strong arm quarterback that can go long. Yeah, they need that deep threat. They need that vertical threat this year for sure. And hopefully that's something that Josh Hoover can bring to the table. They didn't utilize that a ton when he was in the games last year, but you got to be able to get people off the line of scrimmage and just, make the defense respect all levels of the offense. Brian Capers says, thanks again for the great coverage of the Frogs. Thank you, Brian, for listening every day. Also, thank you to Ron, who chimed in and appreciates the coverage. Thank you guys for listening, watching, whenever it is, and however you do it. We'll be back tomorrow as we get ready for Easter weekend. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.